Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Brian and Miss Berlin for Breaking Down Scaredy.
Hello. And
it's very late our time. We pushed it back because somebody had to go see Captain Marvel.
I mean, there's important things in life that you can't put off.
Yeah, I'll let it slide this time only because Captain Marvel was an awesome movie. I got to see it so far. So, yeah, I enjoyed seeing it. What was it? Last weekend? Yeah, last weekend. Yeah, very good. Very good movie.
Oh, yeah.
Looking forward to the Avengers movie, the final one here. So, which will be the last time I think we see a lot of those folks. Some of them are like, oh, I want more money, or I'm not going to play Iron Man anymore, or, whatever. So, yeah. So
the struggles.
Yeah. So, rich people got problems, millions of them, I guess. So, before we get started, I want to give a shout out to Thomas. He's one of our slackers. I'm sorry we couldn't meet at Pecos Pit in Seattle. He was here for Comic-Con. He was like, hey, I want to, buy you beer or something. Your podcast is awesome and you're a very attractive person. I was like, well, I appreciate that. But, if you can make it, great. It's fine. Unfortunately, I had to go back and have a meeting, so we weren't able to make it. So I hope, you're listening to this, and, welcome for the shout out. So, Miss Berlin, you've been a busy person this week. 4 podcasts.
Yeah.
4. I
think it's been 4. It's been...
Did we not sign?
Busy.
Are we not exclusive? Are you
allowed
to see other podcasts?
I told you right up front that I'm not ready for that kind of commitment.
That's filthy. All right. Well, yeah. So I know of one, the Breaking Into Cybersecurity you did, and you mentioned Many Hats before we started the Many Hats podcast.
Yeah.
And there was another one. Oh, you and Bill, Mr. Gardner, did a show, right?
No, we're scheduled to do one. Maybe it was just 3. Oh, it would have been 4 but ours got canceled.
Oh, yeah, the one on Thursday.
Moved. Yeah.
Things happened in our...
It would have been 4, but it's been 3.
Yeah, we had a guest fall through.
And an online interview thing that I'm doing.
Oh, okay. Cool. Well, you're still one of the busiest people in InfoSec right now. So your hacker's health is going on. Miss Roddie, or I think she said she was at Troopers, which... or someplace like that. She's over in Germany, so I think that's where Troopers is.
Yeah, she's in Germany, and then when she comes back, she's going to run the B-Sides Austin thing for mental health hackers.
Nice.
Because of my terrible scheduling issues that I've had recently.
Right.
I'll be in North Carolina instead. And then I'm going to B-Sides Nashville with the Village.
Goodness.
And I don't know if I'm speaking at B-Sides Nashville. I know I'm like a backup speaker.
Oh, that's cool.
Because I turned in my CFP 5 minutes before it was due. And it was like, this is my talk title. Have I ever let you down before?
Wow. It's quite arrogant of you. Look, I'm kind of a big deal. I'm Amanda Berlin. Here's my, I got to talk. Title and content to be named later. But I want to talk. So Yeah,
and Lauren yelled at me, but I figured it wouldn't get accepted, but I did tell them I'd submit.
Right.
So I technically didn't break a promise.
Oh, that's good. Well, that's good.
So I'm a backup speaker for that, and then I'm also talking at Bill's. It's the conference that they run for Marshall University. It's like a digital forensics conference.
It's AIDE, right? AIDE?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
that's
I'm
a really good one.
There after that.
Yeah. So if you people are wondering if out there where Mr. Betcher is, he's on vacation in Big Bend, Texas, I think. So if you are in Big Bend right now,
I wonder what they have in Big Bend.
He likes him some hiking. I'll tell you what.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
He was telling me about these hikes where it's like, oh, it's just a 10-mile hike, nice stretch of the legs, and I was like, wow, that's impressive. So he'll be back next week. He's going to be with us next week for another podcast that we're going to be doing. So last week we had part 1 with Noid. That was really great. Sorry if you came here expecting part 2, but it's just part 1 with Noid last week. We actually have a guest this week as well. I wanted to have him on, because I didn't want to have him wait any longer. And his name is Zach Ruble, like the currency, but not. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Right on. So, Zach, tell us a little bit about yourself. What makes you tick? Why'd you get into InfoSec, and what are you doing right now?
Sure. So my name is Zach Ruble. I'm currently an undergrad student at UW Buffalo, pursuing a computer science degree. And I've always been interested in cybersecurity ever since I got my Minecraft server DDoSed when I was in middle school. And I mentioned that a bit in my talk. It was a great experience. But that's how I got interested in cybersecurity.
Well, what was your first computer?
My first computer, I think it was some Mac, like a Macintosh or something.
Oh, God.
I'm pretty young.
You're so freaking young.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's all right.
I'm just starting my security journey.
Oh, God. I'm so old.
Yes, you are.
Wise.
Oh, he's so diplomatic. Listen to him. I'm so wise. Wow.
No, you're old.
It's like that cake song, friend is a 4-letter word. Anyway, I actually turned 40 years old next week. So
do you? Happy birthday.
I'm entering my semi-curmudgeonness. So, yeah.
You've been a curmudgeon at all ever since I've known you.
Oh wow! I'm Perry curmudgeon-y or whatever the But yeah, no, I appreciate Zach's inexperience, because when I saw him talk at B-Side Seattle, I could have sworn he'd been talking for years at doing briefs and talks, because I was like, man, I was just blown away at the confidence that he portrayed up on the during the talk. So you were a very interesting speaker, and I was like the first or second person to shake your hand up there, and I appreciate you submitting your talk. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Maybe you could tell us a bit about what the topic was, and we'll get started from there.
Yeah, so the idea of the talk was to see how we can chain together public web applications to create command and control infrastructure. And we were trying to do this on the cheap, so without putting any credit cards down, without paying any money.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we find interesting functionality in public web apps to create advanced C2 infrastructure?
Now you said we. Is this the royal we, or did you were you the only one doing the research?
No, it was me. Yeah, just me.
Okay, so royal we. All right. So
yeah.
your actual title was living off the WAN, which I was like, okay, you're the living off the LAN, like with attackers who use the tools that are already on the system to do naughty things instead of trying to upload netcat or bash scripts or something. And yeah, the objective was to do things that are for free, which is great. So, let me see. Where did we get started at? So you mentioned something called Teaching Assistant RCE, which we talked about before, and I got clarification on this. Could you maybe tell me?
Elaborate on that?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So it might have been a little confusing when I spoke at B-Sides, but the talk concerns itself with the post-exploitation phase, and I jokingly said TARCE, and that's because it's pretty easy to get initial access. So when I submit my code at school, the TAs run my code without checking it, so it could be a backdoor, and so then I have access. So there's a plethora of ways to get access: phishing, TARCE, finding vulnerability and exploiting it.
Yeah. Do they not realize that people could take advantage of them in that manner?
Well, I mean, they're students in the computer science program as well, and they don't really have a security background. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe that's something that you need to teach them about is, I just, opened up port 4444 on your box and shoveled a shell back to your system.
I'm hoping to graduate, not get expelled, but yeah.
Okay, well, if
he can get paid for it then after that.
I guess if that's a goal, you could, go ahead and do that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what the basics of C2 are and what C2 is. C2 is command and control. So maybe you could give us a little explanation of what that is in a nutshell.
Yeah, so the way I broke it down in my talk was I gave a little example of what we do at the Cybersecurity Club at UW Bothell. And the way we demonstrate some cybersecurity C2 concepts there is we have people stand up a basic web application, we have them serve a static file with a basic bash command, and then we have them write a little Python malware. This Python malware scrapes the website, takes whatever it gets, and then executes it as a command. And so here we have the three components of basic C2. We have the C2 infrastructure, we have the communication channel, and then we have the victim. The C2 infrastructure, that's our Apache web server, or Nginx. The communication channel is over HTTP, and then the victim is just any old desktop. And some other properties we can draw from that is C2 infrastructure needs to be able to send commands to malware. The malware needs to execute it, and then it needs to send the commands back. In this example I just mentioned, we're not actually sending the commands back, but in the ideal world, we want to send it back to have more robust C2 infrastructure. And now with these different components, we can start to switch them out and play with, maybe the communication channel. Maybe we use TLS instead of just plain old HTTP. Maybe we have a scalable backend. So that's the idea of basic C2 infrastructure.
So you say the victim receives the commands. Doesn't that require the victim to actually have some way of communicating to or receiving how would the victim receive the commands in the first place?
So the victim could reach out, right? Because they're probably behind a firewall and they wouldn't be able to directly receive the command, but they could reach out to a public web app and scrape some data and then execute that data.
Okay. All right. So you say you base the C2 selection on environment, and some of the examples you give in here are, let me see, what's this one? Oh, I'm old and I don't know what the one with the cat thing is. Oh, that's GitHub. Okay, Discord, Spotify. I don't know what this one with the blue F is. I don't know what that means.
Yeah,
that's Facebook.
I don't know.
Facebook, Twitter, and Slack. So, okay, one of the ones that surprised me was Spotify. I don't use Spotify. I haven't used it in forever. So, how can is it a playlist or something that you're downloading for Spotify?
Sure.
Or?
So we need to keep in mind with C2 infrastructure, as long as we can communicate like a state change, some form of information change, we can have a C2. So with Spotify, all you have to do in there is search for a text field that you can modify with an API. So you could have a description for a playlist or a title of a song. So any sort of data that you can change can then become a viable C2.
Okay. So anything with an API call. All right.
So if our malware can interface with Spotify's service and read data from it, and then can also change that data, then we can start to transmit data, shovel data back and forth.
Okay. And this would be hiding in what, the ID3 tags of the music that's playing on your specific playlist? How would something like that work?
So I haven't actually tested Spotify, but I think there's comment sections in Spotify that you can modify, or any field that has text input that you can modify. Okay,
so like
you selected Slack to do your like.
Yeah, I selected Slack, but I'm just trying to show people that you can choose any sort of web application that can communicate a change in state.
That's interesting, but you also need to be able to view that. So if you put a review in a song like, "Hey, this song is the best," with a hashtag, a hash or something, a SHA-56 hash or 256 hash that, it can be decoded and actually do something with, or a base 64 encoded value, not a hash. SHA-256 wouldn't be reversible, but if you put like a base 64 encoded bit in there, could that be how you might use that?
Sure. So if you, I'm not sure if there's comment functionality on Spotify, but if you were to say post in a comment, you'd have your malware pull down the latest comments and search for its username, and then whatever your comment was, it would take it, base 64 decode it. You'd probably want to actually encrypt it, not just base 64 encode it, but then it would execute that, and then it would use the API to create a new comment and push the results of whatever just executed back up into Spotify.
Yeah. So you tried to do this on the cheap. This isn't the first time that these kinds of things have been used, right? I mean, Ms. Berlin, do you remember something back in the day where people were using something with Britney Spears, like they were putting posts or something, and it was acting as a C2 server? I have to find that. It sounds familiar. Hang on. Feel free to ask questions, Ms. Berlin.
Now I'm just thinking about the Britney Spears stuff.
Go ahead.
Jumping back to the Spotify example, you can just change the title of your playlist to transmit that data.
Oh, wow.
Instead of just using comment.
Okay.
Right.
Huh. Yeah, so I found the one bleeping computer, and I put the link in the show notes. Russian state hackers use Britney Spears' Instagram to control malware. So, so it's not. It's a fairly. I think it's probably still fairly novel.
I imagine people do use Twitter for that a lot.
Yep.
Yeah.
Before I began this endeavor, I'd seen multiple examples of people using Twitter or Instagram with steganography.
Okay.
But the way this idea came about for me was our local ACM chapter at UW Bothell asked our club to run a workshop or a talk at their hackathon, and their hackathon was on bot development. So I figured, okay, let's create a botnet, and so that's how the idea evolved. And through that process, I started, and then I decided to look up, hey, has someone else done this? And they had. I continued on, try to implement it myself, and from there, this talk slowly grew.
Awesome. Okay. I'm going to put a link into the UW Bothell ACM group just in case anybody's interested in that. Okay. So you've got here that so like you said, it's not just limited to things like GitHub or Gists or Discord or Slack or whatever. It's anything that can be changed. So
and looking into any of these examples, did you see any not saying there are or aren't, but did you see any cases where any of these sites or services or whatever try and, I don't know, search for it or block for it or?
Yeah, that's one thing I didn't have time necessarily to pursue, or I didn't create time for that, but that'd be something to look into.
Because I know I've, it's not the same thing, but I've tried to create fake Facebook accounts, right? And their detection for that is way more advanced than I thought it was, than I thought it was going to be. So I didn't know if maybe they had stuff around that too.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
So for these services, is there any hard requirements like a publicly facing API, or I mean, what's the bare minimum needed for this? Because I'm sure it won't work for everything. Like, I don't know, Gmail. You wouldn't be able to query a Gmail server unless you had some kind of login. I would assume anything that required like two-factor auth, if it was enabled, probably wouldn't work, or they force two-factor. So you need like a public API in this case that can query those things. Like if you wanted to query iTunes or something like that, right?
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned two-factor auth, and that would make it a lot more difficult to implement a malware that would communicate with it. And this talk, I mentioned a lot how we're trying to keep the cost low, and that's we're trying to keep the cost low for human hours too.
Sure.
So it's a lot easier if they provide a service and an API readily accessible for you to interface with. And so with Slack, I use the real-time messaging API as the communication conduit. And for other sites, they may not provide an API, but you can still maybe post their website and just scrape that data manually. But it becomes a lot more convenient when they provide an API for you.
Yeah. I would imagine anonymity is kind of important too. You don't want to be caught. And I think somebody asked a question at your talk about why didn't you use an AWS instance or a free AWS instance? I would imagine there's some kind of paperwork that has to be filed, or, credit card or something. So, I mean, if you wanted to be nefarious, you could put a fake credit card number in or something that would defeat the credit card check. But the idea is to kind of be laying low somewhat and not, saying, hey, I'm Zach Ruble, I'm going to set up this, or I'm going to set up this Amazon instance, acting as a C2. That would leave a paper trail back to you, right?
Sure, and that wouldn't be as big of an issue if you're conducting a legitimate pen test, and that was the scenario here. Conducting a legitimate pen test. The reason I didn't use AWS, it didn't really come to my mind, but you have to jump through a lot more hoops with setting up an AWS account. And I think, people can correct me if I'm wrong, you need a credit card to put down and whatnot.
Yeah. The free tier, if you don't shut it down after a certain amount of time, they charge your card for whatever unused bits you've done. So obviously there's a paper trail there. Unless you're using somebody else's credit card to do so, then the idea is to be as somewhat sneaky as possible. So that makes complete sense. So let me see here. You've got Slack as a C2. What's this Slack shell that you mentioned here? Slack as a C2, but with PowerShell. I thought Slack was like a Node.js application or something like that. What's the PowerShell all about?
I'm not actually sure what they write Slack in, the Slack service, but when I was going about creating this presentation or a portion of this presentation for the ACM hackathon, partway through I decided, okay, let me look up and see if someone's already done this. And so I have a slide in my slide deck basically calling out this Brent person who did something very similar but with PowerShell. So they implemented them on Malware with PowerShell instead of Python, which what I did.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, cool. So API token used for authentication. Yeah, he's got a whole big thing in here using PowerShell to interact with APIs. So, wow. Okay, that's cool. Is there anything PowerShell can't do? I mean, seriously. Yeah, wow. Let me scroll down here. So... let's see. So in this case, you've got, I'm looking at your slide here. We have the slides available. We're not going to be able to push them out just yet. Zach's going to tell us when we can release those. But you're using something called the RTM, which was the real-time messaging API. Does that mean you'd be able to actually make an API call to post a message if you wanted to use an RTM, and then that sends it back to the user? Does the user require Slack to be on the box in this case?
Yeah, so what I did here was I chose Slack's real-time messaging API, which allows you to, I used a Python library. With a Python library and a token, I am able to push messages into a Slack channel. And then I'm also able to read messages. So this satisfies that requirement of sending and receiving messages. So a malware would check into the channel. If it sees new commands, it would take those, parse those, execute them, and then send that data back to the Slack channel where the operator is at.
Nice.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And all you need is Python on the victim box to make the call. You don't actually need anything like Slack installed on it.
Nope. We're just interfacing with their API.
Huh. Okay.
And because we are communicating with an actual Slack server, it looks like legitimate Slack traffic because it is.
Right.
And that has a lot of benefits. And that's how we're able to fly under the radar, because you're going to see in a lot of corporate environments they use Slack to communicate.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the reasons we put the Brakesec on the Brakesec community on Slack, because it's easier because everybody mostly has Slack installed on their work boxes anyway. So adding another Slack instance isn't wouldn't call off as many alarms or bring up as many alarms as if a Discord or Mattermost.
On the endpoint, you'd see it be acting different, right?
On the endpoint, so I was more focused on the network side. I didn't really look as much on the endpoint side, so I'm not quite sure. Someone else would have to speak on that. And one way this could be detected, though, is if you had a really suspicious blue team, when you do connect to a Slack server, it does a DNS lookup for, brakesec.slack.com, whatever you guys' URL is.
Exactly what it is.
Domain name is. So if, say, I'm impersonating Microsoft, I use that example, and I was Microsoft with a bunch of O's, .slack.com, that would be suspicious. But I mentioned this in my talk. When policy is really restrictive, people subvert that and they start, spinning up their own Slack servers or GitLab instances because they can't get access to legitimate ones. And we can fly under the radar with that noise and then create our own Slack instances and blend in because other people are doing that for legitimate purposes.
Right.
And honestly, the amount of people that actually look at DNS traffic, nobody's going to catch it anyways.
Right. And if they have Slack in the environment, they're not going to notice that either. It's all going to hide in like Zach said, it's all going to hide in the noise. Yeah. I mean, it might look odd. So one of the things I was thinking of is if it's a Python script doing it, would there be additional bits like, python.exe is making the call? It would be that process making the call to Slack. So in that case, there might be some...
talking like endpoint detection stuff. It's going to be acting a little bit different than the actual Slack.
Yep.
Right.
I didn't spend most of my time on the endpoint. It was more on getting the C2 infrastructure up and running. But yeah, you could do a lot more to disguise what you're actually doing.
Okay.
Yeah, because, once you get it over that API and stuff, it's going to bypass all firewall IPS stuff. So.
Right. The PowerShell one might be a little noisy if you're not expecting people to use PowerShell in your office. So,
Same with Python, though.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. No, that makes complete sense. Calling python.exe or the Python library user bin Python or whatever. So, you had a demo. Is there any kind of you showed us a demo at the talk. Could you explain what the demo was about? Or if you've got it there, maybe you could run it and we could do the screen share thing.
I don't have it right here up and running. I can record a video later if you want and send it to you.
That might be nice. We can post it to our YouTube channel if you've got that available. So I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, but
it's okay. It's okay. I can describe it. So as I mentioned briefly earlier, you have imagine a Slack instance, whether it's your phone client, a web browser, or whatnot, and you're in a Slack channel. You issue a command like ls, and then you'll just see the results of ls pop up. So what was happening there is you have malware running in a virtual machine. That's what I had at B-Sides. And it's checking in the channel. It sees ls. It grabs it. It's parsing that data, executing, and sending the results back. So very simple demo, but I build upon this, as we'll talk about in a bit. Right.
So on your slide 14, you said the Slack benefits. There's trustworthy Slack servers, a TLS connection, the benefits of SaaS, cross-platform experience. Can you use existing servers? So if you were, let's say you got an invite to Brakesec and you added a starter post or something with a base 64 value there. Is it required to set up your own Slack server, or could you use an existing one out there, like the NetSec one or something like that?
So that's actually a really good question. Something I didn't think about. You could, if they allow you to add bot users. So we have a Slack server in the cybersecurity club at UW Bothell, and I didn't restrict who could add Slack bots, and so we had some issues there. But if those other Slack servers don't restrict who can add Slack bots, I could, or someone else could just add a Slack bot, get that authentication token, and then they could use a Slack channel and use your own Slack server as a C2, and that wouldn't be good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the things we learned on the Slack channel early on was, because we're on the free tier, we only have 10 integrations and only a certain number of bots that can be added, and we learned pretty quickly to require verification of plugins or integrations and bots, and don't just allow things willy-nilly all over the place. So if you're a Slack admin, that might be something you want to look into to make it not everybody can just add plugins and new apps and things to Slack, because that could cause your world of hurt.
Also kind of surprised that they don't turn off all of that by default.
Yep.
No, they're not about security. They're trying to open and collaborate and do all the things. So, that's,
I met one of the Slack security guys at ShmooCon, not this year, last year.
I know we have people who work for Slack on our Slack as well, so
yeah, we should yell at them.
I've tried yelling at them to get me access to all of my logs, but it didn't work out so well.
Oh.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I didn't yell. I was asking nicely if they had any kind of special tier for that. But that seems like it would be another way of going. You just hide in plain sight on somebody's really public and active Slack channel.
That's extra trust too, right? You have Slack that's trusted, but then if you have a NetSec thing, that's a legitimate thing inside the security community, and you're able to get a token for a bot there, that's doubly trusted then.
Right. So what's the when you say you're making the API calls, what does it normally come back as? It's a REST API, right? So it's in key pair format.
I'm getting a JSON response back.
Okay, getting JSON blob, and can you add additional text in there to add to the JSON blob, or is it just a specific? I mean, it must be a rather large blob. So how do you know where to parse through? And what if somebody was to add their own base 64 encoded system or whatever it is you're using just for grins, and it causes your bot to go away? What happens if somebody adds something?
Yeah, so first, secure your Slack server that you're using as a C2.
Right.
You can add your bot to a private channel. And then every bot you have should maybe have its own private channel, because let's say a blue team finds your Python code and they get access to a token. They could then maybe use that to find out what other systems are infected, or maybe someone could take control of your botnet that way. Yeah. So the actual implementation of this, you need to be careful about how you do it.
Okay. Yeah. So not only just restricting integrations, but if you're using a well-known Slack, locking down, making it making so that people can't create their own channels might be an important thing. Yep. I know we're talking a lot about Slack, but that's the one I know because I'm too old to understand what Spotify is. So. Because I'm old now. So
yeah, and I haven't looked into Spotify. It's just. I assume it can be used as a platform. It has an API. You can most likely communicate data between it. So I threw that on there. Yeah,
and definitely any kind of Slack clones, Mattermost, Discord, all of those would be available. So you did mention Facebook and Twitter. Do they have access to a public API, or are you just doing the scraping?
I've seen examples of Twitter before.
Twitter does for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know they got in trouble with that, having oversharing of API calls, and people were getting kicked off of it. But I didn't know if there were still ways to interact with Facebook or Twitter via like a typical API.
Yeah, I highly doubt that they shut down their API completely. I would imagine it would be more restrictive.
That's one of the first things I learned how to do with Python.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Who is it? There's a YouTube.
Sendex?
Maybe.
Oh.
I don't know. He teaches you. He taught how to do OSENT through the Twitter API.
Okay, I don't know. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Twitter still has a API, and I assume Facebook does too.
Okay. Okay, good. I thought I accidentally played a YouTube video again because I'm an idiot. But so there's an API key for those, right?
Yeah. So going back to adding bot users, when you add a bot user, you get a bot token, an OAuth token, and you use the bot token to access the workspace and interface with the API.
Wow. Okay.
So it's pretty simple, and the most difficult part of this is really installing the bot and clicking through that GUI. So if someone were to continue this, you would automate the process. Unfortunately, if there are Slack people listening, they don't have any reCAPTCHA or whatever. You just go to slack.com/create, and it'll ask you for your email. You provide an email, it emails you an ID, and you put that in the fields, and then boom, you have a Slack instance. So that can be very easily automated with like 10-minute mail and all those temp email services. So
right. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Just Insights.
Oh, I know him.
One of the newest Arch books.
Yeah. Okay, I know who he is. So you said challenges to overcome. It says scaling. Why is that a challenge, scaling?
I kind of touched upon it just a second ago, where it can be difficult to generate a new bot every single time you want to deploy it on a machine. So you have to automate that process, and also we're restricted to 10 bots per Slack workspace.
Right.
But you can put some of your own crypto into it, so that you can have you can share keys between infected machines.
Okay.
Does that make sense what I said there?
Yeah,
or
no.
Elaborate?
That makes complete sense. So it says, what happens if your Slack gets burned? So you've got So
say
what
you have
happens
a
if
really
it does get
suspicious
burned?
blue team and they see that Slack is running on a Windows server. Okay, that probably shouldn't be happening. And they block access to your Slack server. So now we need to innovate a little bit. We can fall back on a couple C2 principles. We didn't talk about this before, but in my slides I have it. We have something called a short haul server. And this is a server you use to issue direct commands to your infected machine and get results back. Now, you also have something called a long haul server. And this is something you only use to regain access to that infected machine. So if Slack, our short haul server, gets burned, we have something called a long haul server. And our malware, another piece of persistence on the infected machine, will check in, say, every 24 hours plus or minus a random amount of time to see if, hey, does this operator need to regain access to their machine? So we need to implement a long haul server.
Okay. And Slack in this case would be considered a short haul type of server, or could it actually do both?
You could use it as a long haul server, but in this instance, I'm using it as a short haul server.
Okay.
With long haul servers, we don't need that real time communication that Slack provides.
All right.
You just need to send one message every, say, 24 hours or whatnot.
Okay. So it says diversify, so not just Slack as a short haul server. Central location for our long haul server to tie in, either a client-side program or some central server. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by a central location. If the long haul server is the central location, right?
Yeah, I'm not actually quite sure what I meant there either. We could probably skip over that bullet point.
Okay, all right. Well, I was just thinking, you were mentioning something for the long, central location. I was thinking of like a BitTorrent server or something like that, using Open BitTorrent or something to be able to send commands that way. But it might be a little noisy or a little more detectable, because a lot of organizations do detect BitTorrent traffic. So,
gotcha.
So you said one night in bed, and you've got a little house with sleeping G's, not Z's. So you came up with a different idea.
In bed, I was thinking about my B-sides talk, and all I had so far was Slack as a C2, and I thought, okay, I should really have more for my B-sides talk. So I was thinking, okay, it'd be really cool if we could use Google as a C2 and not, docs.google.com or, their spreadsheets. People have done that before. Mm-hmm. I've seen that. And so I decided, hey, okay, how can I use Google Search as a C2? So I began to think about how to do that. And if you picture a Google Search page, you type, say, B-sides Seattle in, and up will pop the URL, and then right below that, there's a little portion that was actually sucked in from the web page. Mm-hmm. So if I can inject my content right there, then we may have a viable C2 communication pathway. So I began to think, how would I get my content there? How does Google actually get that content there? And so Google goes out and crawls the web and pulls in information about websites. So if I stand up my own web server and Google crawls that, it can maybe pull in some of my commands. My malware would perform a Google search, and then you get that command and execute it. And it would now be going over google.com as a C2 instead of over my sketchy website, right? So I began that process of how do I do that? And when I'm on a pen test, I don't want to wait a couple weeks to regain access to my malware. And I found out with Google, when I submit a URL for it to crawl, it's going to take up to a couple days to a few weeks. And so that wasn't really viable.
Right.
So I switched over to Bing, and it told me, hey, we can crawl up to X amount of URLs per day automatically. And so I thought, great, my talk is done. So I let my talk rest for a little bit, and I came back a week or two later. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that your website will only surface when the quality criteria is met. And so I didn't want to do search engine optimization for my C2. Mm-hmm. So I decided to go back to Google. And if I can't publish content on my own web page and have Google crawl that, well, why don't I publish content on a different web page that Google crawls a lot?
Right.
And so I decided to use Reddit, because Google probably crawls Reddit a ton.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Am I going too fast here?
No. So I mean, there's fairly popular Reddits, fairly infamous Reddits, just recently. That I could definitely see you adding to that. Problem with if you pick the wrong Reddit and you've got some moderators who are actually doing their job, they would pick up on that fairly quickly as that being like a spam post, right?
Yep. So for this instance, I chose to use the front page of Reddit because Google probably crawls out the most, and it turns out it crawls it a lot.
Okay.
And I chose the Reddit Rising section because I thought that would have the least amount of eyeballs. And so when I tested this out, actually, people were very curious about what I was doing. I have a slide here in my slide deck that has a response to one of my comments that says, "Is this base 64 or something?" So people were wondering what I was posting. In fact, it wasn't. It was an encrypted string. And then in another instance, people just downvoted my post because they were really confused why I had this random string on the subreddit. And so if it gets downvoted too much, my fear was that Google wouldn't pull that data in. But yes, you're right. There is a potential for an admin to be like, what are they doing? That doesn't look legit. It looks a little fishy, and they may stomp it out.
Yeah. Now, you could also create your own Reddit subreddit that nobody would have access to. You could set it to private, I guess, or something as well. And that would be a nice short haul kind of deal, right?
Well, Google still needs to crawl that site.
Well, you can make an API call like you did with Slack stuff, right?
Sorry. You said short haul. Yes, you could use Reddit as a short haul server if you wanted to.
Cool.
In this instance, I was using it as a portion of my long haul server. But yeah, you're right.
And you were just commenting. You weren't actually doing new posts or anything. You were just commenting on the stuff that was already in Rising.
Yep.
Oh, I see. Okay, so it was less likely to be removed by a moderator if it wasn't like a top level post.
Yep.
Because they're not going to be reading all the comments.
Oh, that's nice.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Or you could do YouTube comments probably too.
Yep.
I imagine.
Yeah. So one question I've got is you've got a random string in there. How do you actually search for that when you're scraping?
Yeah,
is it a regex or what?
So a way to test this out is you go to google.com and you can use some basic Google foo. So you can type site reddit.com and then a specific string you're searching for. So I had a keyword, and my keyword was like LOL WTF bacon, something crazy like that. No one else would type.
Right.
And then I selected only search in the past 24 hours because I don't want to get other people's results. That would mess up with my probably weak parsing on my malware side. And so then up would just pop, it would just pop up that single post with the LOL WTF and then that encrypted string. So I was searching for a keyword here, which would allow Google to surface those results to me.
Okay. You didn't happen to use rebloggy.com or anything for your CNC, because I'm finding LOL WTF bacon on those sites too. So
no. Is that recent?
Well, I mean, it's a top Tumblr post. So I don't see a date for this one, but yeah.
So one of the things that helps is, hey, search within the past 24 hours or past weeks. So that way, I mean, there's a lot of stuff on the internet, and Google has a lot of things. We don't want to get the other stuff. We want to get our content.
Right. That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. And I'll publish my slides so that people can follow along with this, so they can understand better what I'm talking about.
Okay. So you said apparently you were doing some research. You found a novel search engine-based method for discovering command and control servers from December 16th, 2015.
So partway through working on this, I again decided, hey, I wonder if anyone else had done this. And it turns out someone had. I haven't read the paper. Seems like an interesting paper, but they have pretty much the same things I was thinking of just a couple years earlier. When I was like probably in high school.
Oh God!
Sorry, I'm rubbing it in.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Happy birthday.
Can you drink yet? Legally?
Can you drink yet?
Oh yeah, I can.
Okay.
They actually had a question. There's a speaker gift for B-sides, and they're like, "We weren't sure if you're old enough, so we have this bottle of alcohol or like a Google listening, no, not a listening device, a Wi-Fi device." But yeah, so it's kind of funny.
Okay. All right. So you've got a slide.
If anybody asks, you didn't get it from us.
Yeah.
Oh no, I took the Google thing, but
there you go. So it says 1 week later, and you have reading a bit more. So apparently this wasn't all happy good times here. There were some issues that came up.
Yep. I think I kind of skipped over some of the issues, but so I thought I would be able to use Bing to crawl my web page, but it turned out a certain quality criteria needed to be met. And so because that didn't work, I started to get really nervous, and then I was clicking around the search engine. And I was thinking, okay, how can I get my information in the search engine for my malware to perform a search and pull that data down? And so then I clicked on the news tab, and I was like, ooh, what if I could publish news articles? And because that's, those want to be really relevant and published right when it happens. So it's pretty real time. But it turns out probably, as when I was talking to people, after 2016 election, it's probably a lot more difficult to publish news now. I could jump through those hoops to try to create some fake news, but again, that's going to be a lot more difficult than it needs to be.
Right.
Depends on the website. They'll probably let you post some things.
Sure, but like Bing aggregates the news, and I think you need to have a special account for it to actually publish it. Same thing with Google, but I definitely looked into it.
The idea was you didn't want to create a paper trail back to yourself if you were actually doing this for an engagement, not necessarily being a bad guy, but like for the engagement that you don't want people doing research and finding out you're just
more is a little more legally questionable. And again, a lot more hoops to jump through, and you can do it a lot easier with Google crawling Reddit.
Right.
So
was there a way you actually figured out how to solve it, like maybe using GitHub or anything like that?
So one thing we didn't touch upon is we have our short haul server, which is Slack. And then we have our long haul server, so our Google crawling Reddit and us doing a Google search. Right. Now, those are two disparate systems, but what if we want to tie them together to make it easier to use? And so my idea was, why don't we add another Slack server so that this Slack server communicates with the other Slack server and also posts to the Reddit API. Unfortunately, with Slack, you can't take those programmatic actions to post to Reddit's API. You're limited to a certain type of functionality. Thankfully, earlier on in my research, I stumbled across a website called glitch.com. And glitch.com is amazing for people like us. It provides it's basically a free serverless platform where you throw Node.js code at it and it runs it for you for free. You don't need a login. You can click a lock button and it just locks it, so only you have access. And you get command line access to a Docker container. So, sweet.
Is there anything Node hasn't done to screw up the internet so far? Oh, wait.
One more time, what?
Is there anything Node hasn't done to screw up the internet so far? I mean, this sounds like a nightmare.
So, my idea here was just write a little Python code that interfaces with the real-time messaging API again to pull data from our Slack operator server and then push it into the short haul server. And then the malware would take the contents of the short haul server, execute it, and then send it all the way back up the chain. If we want to recover our malware, you execute a recover command in the Slack operator server, and that goes to that gets pulled in by the Glitch server, and then Glitch posts to the Reddit API, and then you have the whole process. Now, the night before the talk, I was stitching these things together, and I had tested before if I could connect to Slack from Glitch, and I could. But the night before the talk, I put my code in there, and it just didn't work. I was able to connect, but I wasn't able to pull data. Now, I'm not sure if I was able to pull data when I had tested it before. And so that didn't work. And so I was really nervous before my talk. Like, do I stay up all night before my first talk? Or do I just tell them what I would have done? I decided to tell them what I would have done and how I would have solved this. And so earlier I mentioned Glitch. It can run your Node.js code. And so now we need to figure out how we can simulate the sending messages back and forth. So Slack has a couple cool features that we can use. Slack has something called Slack Events API, or yes, the Slack Events API. And so when I issue, say I type a command or something in the Slack channel, it will publish the results of that to some endpoint that you specify. So now I can specify my glitch Docker container that's running my Node.js code as an endpoint. So when I put a command in the Slack operator server, it sends that data to the glitch server. And Slack also has this other sweet feature called webhooks. And this is where you can post code to an endpoint on Slack, and it will shove that whatever you post into a Slack channel. So now we've satisfied that sending and receiving messages of command and control infrastructure. So when we type a command inside a Slack channel, the events API sends it to API endpoint and glitch, then glitch sends a post request to the other Slack server webhook, and it gets dumped in there. Then the malware connects with the real-time messaging API, takes that data, executes it, and it goes all the way back. So I was finally able to get that working today before the podcast, so that was great. But during the talk, I said, okay, this is theoretically how we would fix the problem, and that works. So that was a lot of talking. Are there any questions you have there to clarify that?
I'm looking at the slide that you have in slide 43. So it shows the operator server, the man in the middle, the Reddit posts, everything back to your victim. You could also have the victim, confirm that the command was done as written. You could, since the RTM is bidirectional, I think you could probably, verify. You could probably query and find out how many bots you actually have or how many victims you actually have if you queried everything out, correct?
What do you mean specifically by that? So the victim would be able to query how many infected people there were, or
no? Your short haul server would be able to query how many victims you actually have based on, how everything's connected, right?
Via the real-time messaging API.
Yeah.
So the issue with that is, you need to interface with the real-time messaging API with like Python code or whatnot. Mm-hmm. You can't. You don't have programmatic behavior with Slack. So from the short haul server to the operator server, you can't use the real-time messaging API. So that wouldn't work.
Okay. So how would you take inventory of how many bots you actually have in this case?
So you'd have to implement some code in the glitch middleman, the Node.js thing, and that would keep a counter for you. I've only really been using this with one bot right now, but this is where you'd have to scale and get a little more clever.
Well, my thought was, let's say you've got 3,000 victims, fairly decent, but you don't want to use all 3,000 to do whatever. Let's say you're a bad guy. You want to take 1,500 of them and use them to mine whatever the cryptocurrency of the day is. And then the other 1,500 be used for, say, denial of service type attacks. Is there a way for you with your current configuration to do that kind of separation, or is it all for one and one for all?
Yeah. So right now is more a proof of concept, and this particular setup is more meant for a targeted engagement. Okay. Less of a distributed, infect a bunch of computers sort of thing. We don't need Slack to do that. We don't need to communicate in real time with something that's doing like Monero mining, right? Mm-hmm. We can use something else for that.
Right. Could you give one victim a different command than the others, or are you just basically blasting it out to all of the victims at the same time?
So if everyone has their own bot key, you'd send them different commands, and you could join the bot to a different channel in the Slack channel, Slack server. Yeah.
Yeah, because you said there was up to 10 bots on the free version of Slack, so technically you could have your botnets respond to different bots, or different bots could tell your victims to do specific things.
Yep. And then you can actually have more victims subscribed than just one to a single key if you have each of the victims have their own private key and they can decrypt individual commands just meant for them. So you can scale it, but that becomes a little more difficult.
Okay. So Ms. Berlin, I know, works at a managed service provider, and I'm sure people who are listening to this are like, well, how do we defend against something like this? So you wrote this, you created this Frankenstein. How would you kill it?
How would I kill it? I don't want to kill my baby.
Well, in this case, us defender types, or, us folks who, may see this from, incident response kind of things. If I was wanting to kill it, what would be the easiest way to do that? Because it seems like it's all kind of insulated and disparate.
Yeah. So there's multiple ways this could be taken down. First, you have, so say I'm infecting Acme Corp or whatever. They could deal with the issue either on the client side or on the network side. But you also have the services I'm interacting with. They can also try to detect some of this. As far as like on the Acme Corp side, and anomaly detection, I mean, I haven't been in the industry as long as all of you, but I would imagine if, again, a Windows server is communicating over Slack, that's not good. But what makes it so difficult is that we are using legitimate services. Yeah. And I guess I'd have to throw out there, like, I wouldn't worry about this stuff if you haven't patched, if you can't deal with the low-hanging fruit. Right. If we are doing this for a red team engagement, you wouldn't want to start off using Slack as a C2. You'd want to start off using something basic to see if the blue team can catch that. If they can, then you slowly start to advance. So I don't have a great answer for you. If other people do, I'm all ears.
So, Ms. Berlin, I think it would be fairly impossible unless are you going to block Google? No. Are you going to block Slack? No. Are you going to block Reddit?
If you're going to do like man in the middle SSL inspection, and like full packet captures, maybe.
Yeah, but then what if I encrypt my messages that are going to my clients and they decrypt it, right? Then you're just going to have more encrypted data too. Right?
A couple of like the more advanced firewall things can do like man in the middle, like unencryption of SSL stuff.
Sure.
So it, I mean, if your client encrypted it and then sent it over and had it, I really don't know. And then, endpoint stuff, with the fact that, that server shouldn't be talking on Slack, or that server shouldn't be running that Python code or PowerShell or whatever you want to run with it. Right. I mean, on the endpoint, it seems like it'd be easier because, I mean, it would look like normal network traffic.
Yeah.
Honestly, if you're looking that deep into network traffic, your endpoint shouldn't be that wide open that you'd allow that to happen anyways.
Right. Yeah. Right.
One thing, theoretically, you could detect it this way is, I'm sure there's some sort of cadence that a normal Slack desktop client checks into a Slack server. I'm not sure what that cadence is. I haven't done that research, but if my malware is checking the Slack server at a much faster cadence, I could tip you off. But really, that's a lot more specialized research.
Right.
That has to be done.
I guess if it's making the same API call several times a minute, or, it might get noisy in that respect. Could you also use this to exfil data? Yeah.
I haven't implemented so you can do that right now, but I mean, the most basic form, cat, etc, shadow, that's exfiltrating data. Right. With Slack, you have the ability to upload files, so it's a matter of interfacing with that API again, and it makes it incredibly easy for you to do it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, you'd have to find some heuristics there. The victim's machine is zipping a bunch of files, and all of a sudden it makes a web call out to a Slack server that, and that's a fairly large packet in this case. That might be something, if you were looking at a Slack channel with a rather large, packet, that might tip somebody off. Or, if they're using it in the office, I don't know of a good way to defend against this.
People share code anyways on Slack, so you're normally uploading files and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there's been some talk about Slack not being all that secure because, apparently you can, with the right URL, you can actually view those posts anywhere on the web. So
really,
I don't know if they fixed it since the last time that we had evaluated Slack at my last employer, but you could send somebody a link or share a link, and it would be a automatic. They could just pull it up in a web browser, that specific URL. So let me see if that's still the case here. Copy. Let me see. Anyway, so okay, so it will be very hard to protect against this because, as you're saying, you're hiding in the shadows, so to speak.
We're hiding in plain sight, kind of. We're using services that people normally use in their day-to-day lives when they're working.
Right. So, see if you can click on that link there, Zach, in the chat window I sent to you specifically. See if that's still a thing. So.
Let's see. No, it's asking me to sign in.
Yay! Okay, they fixed it. All right. So, it was just a link to a show post that I put up a week ago. So that's pretty cool. All right, good. Well, I'm glad they fixed that because that was a major issue at one time. So, wow. Okay. So if I would put it out there to the rest of the Brakesec people, all the listeners out there. One, don't recruit Zach for your evil botnets, please. Two, if you have a way that you can think of defending against this, we'd love to hear about it on our Slack channel or in our Twitter, which we'll mention shortly. Let me see. I think
not letting a bad person on an endpoint is probably a good.
Well, one, how would he
There's a lot of stuff before you get to that point that you could use to defend.
Okay. So it would require a proper, say, like a phish or a malicious download, I would imagine, right?
Yeah. We already have privileges on the machine. We had to do recon. We had to find vulnerabilities. We had to exploit those before we even got to this stage. Mm-hmm. So if you can prevent those initial things or mitigate them somehow. Yeah.
Okay.
Or you're just a student somewhere and you have all that access already.
Yeah.
Students with too much time on their hands should be out, freaking, doing other stuff. Anyway, young punks. Anyway, no, I'm just kidding. This is fantastic work. I never had the opportunity to do any kind of stuff like this when I was your age. Anyway, of course, he had abacuses back when I was your age, as the only computer. So, what's the next steps for this? Is there anything you're planning on adding to it, or refining your methods?
So I mentioned this earlier. It's a pain to get new bot tokens, provision, stuff like that. So automating it would be cool. Probably automation. So I click a button and everything's spun up for me, really decreasing the cost to get things up and running.
Right. Okay. I'm, this is, if I was a blue team person, I'd be very scared about this. So, all right. So you just joined Twitter just before the podcast started. Because
unfortunately, yes.
Because you young people don't use this. You're all on the Instagrams and the WhatsApps and stuff of the world. So you're not on the Facebooks, of course, because that's what grandmas and old people use, like myself. So if somebody wanted to discuss with you this more thoroughly, how would they find you? Sure.
So my Twitter handle, it's the first time I'm saying this ever, is send rubles. So RUBLEZ. So ruble is the Russian currency. So send me rubles.
Nice. I have your email address only because I think you took it off of your slides, but or no, I think you gave it to me. That's what it was when I was asking to speak with you. So it makes me special. So are you planning on putting any kind of code or any of this up on GitHub so that people could maybe continue the research, or are you adding, making it like you're one of your CS projects? What are you looking at for this?
If people want, I can probably publish some of that code. I have some of the code already published for when I did a smaller portion of this presentation. Mm-hmm. Since then, though, the API changed and it kind of broke some of that code, so I may republish some of the fixed code.
So, okay, that's an interesting question. So you said the API broke. If places like Slack...
Sorry, not the API.
Well, I mean, so that's a fair question, though. If they change, the only way that this would really break is if Reddit or Facebook or the Spotifys of the world, they change how their API, sends you information. If they've changed formats, that could be a way that this would break itself, right? It's not self-healing in any
so
way.
It's actually one of the things I experienced. I have a slide in here that what did I learn? And one of the things was services shift. They're constantly updating and change, and that's what happened to me. I wasn't doing an amazing job parsing the output for the first version of their API, and when they shifted it, when they changed their API, it broke my code. Now it's better, but you're right. If they change their API, it could mess with the whole architecture of the command and control infrastructure. But if you have something like Google as a C2, that's less likely to probably be broken. And so you still have that long haul channel where you can say, hey, get me back my access.
Cool. Okay. All right. Awesome. Zach, thanks for coming on. I'm looking forward to seeing you again at CSEC East. I know you were able to join us on the 6th, but we got busy, and the talk was fairly interesting. What did you think of Dr. Cowan's threat modeling? Was it something new for you?
Yeah, so actually right now I'm taking a secure software development class, and we were just talking about threat modeling. So it was really nice to see another perspective. And sorry, not threat modeling, threat assessment. I know he made that distinction.
Yeah, yes, he did.
But it was cool to see it from another perspective. I'm still trying to piece the pieces together for how to actually conduct those and how to do it effectively. But yeah, I enjoyed it.
Okay, cool. Just a reminder, I don't know if you'll be able to attend, but UW has something going on the 29th. I won't mention it on here. I'll mention it to you offline. But Adam Shostak's going to be speaking there, who's kind of like the father of. Yeah, he's like the father of threat assessment and threat modeling. So we'll see if he can get you available to that. It's at the UW campus, so you won't have to go very far.
Batman's Kitchen.
It's at something similar, but I'll let you know after the show's off. So, cool. Ms. Berlin, I know you've got a lot going on, podcasts, because we're not exclusive apparently. How would people get a hold of you if they wanted to talk about all the things that you were involved with?
Twitter's easiest. So at Infosister, INFOSYSTIR, or at Hackers Health.
Awesome. And Mr. Betcher, of course, is the lead developer, and I would assume the CTO because he's the most technical person for LogMD. But if you're interested in finding out information about how LogMD might help you, in your environment, you can go to log-md.com, which will take you to the IMF security site. Him and Mr. Goff are also on the Breaking Down Incident Response podcast, which I hear people enjoy greatly. It's another podcast all dedicated about information incident response and doing forensics and logging on certain systems. So if you're interested in that, there is a link in our show notes, or you can go to imfsecurity.com and go to the BDIR podcast in the upper right-hand corner on the site. So let's see. A couple things here. Workshop.com. I mentioned it last week at the end of the show. SpectreOps is giving some training at WorkshopCon along with Tim Tomes. He's giving his practical web application pen test training. So if you're interested in signing up for that, you can go to workshopcon.com/events and sign up for that. I'm assuming there's still spots available. It happens in about a month. So you can sign up for that. The price, the cost is I think still about $4,000, but it's 3 days of really excellent training. You're gonna learn a lot from that. So let me see. Thank you to our patron people. Thank you for supporting the podcast. We are listener supported currently. So if you are interested in giving a couple of bucks as our tip jar, you got got something interesting from this discussion with Zach, please feel free to hit us up on our Patreon. It's in the show notes as well. So, Oh, yeah. You can follow the Twitter. Podcast Twitter is Brakesec, Brakesec. You can follow me on Twitter, BRYANBRAKE. And if you'd like to join our Slack, which is very active, it is moderated. We have put the moderation hammer down this week because of some things that happened in the news. So, you can join us by DMing Brakesec on Twitter or sending an email to bds.podcast@gmail.com. And we do moderate because I moderated this week. I had to be the bad guy this week. Well, I had to because I think it was requirement. So
yes, for sure.
We have a social contract. We don't allow.
We don't take no shit.
Well, I wasn't going to say that, but yes, we take none of that shit there. I tell you what. But no, we, sometimes when the topics devolve, our social contract says no politics, no, being mean to people. So we had some somewhat semi-political stuff that had to be curtailed. So we fixed that. All right. Well, I think we're good this week. Next week, we will publish part 2 of Noid's interview with us, talking about how you can, get the most that you can out of the languages you have with, speaking to developers and how security people can be myopic sometimes. We're also going to talk about, how to make your reports, especially if your consultants read better to both the technical people and the upper management, which is always something that I myself have a problem with, and you'll hear me discuss that in the show. But if you've ever written a report, it's got to work for both the technical people and the people who need finger puppets to understand what XSS is. So so that'll be out next week, and we've got another great show coming up with some people all over the world. So we're going to be hopefully talking to them, and that'll be up in a couple weeks. So thanks again, Zach, for coming on. If you have any other topics of interest or you want to join our Slack, just hit us up and we'll get you on there. So we appreciate you coming out, though.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you for having me.
Right on. All right. Well, that was it for Breaking Down Security here at the World Headquarters outside of Seattle. Have a great week. Be nice to one another, because the world is just crazy, especially on Twitter and in our Slack. Be nice and take care of yourselves, because you're the only you have. And we will talk to you again soon.
See you later.
Bye-bye.